In the last lecture, we finished this recipe list component. Now let's work on the recipe detail. Now for the recipe detail here, there I want to output the information about the selected recipe. So in here, in this HTML file, I'll add another Bootstrap row and then a column spanning over the full width. And keep in mind, the detail will be added to our component here in the recipes component. So it will be in this column on the right to the list. But in there, I want to have a column spanning the full available width. And I want to start by displaying the image. So let's add the image here. And let's add the image responsive class to it. Now I will fill this with live and output some data there later. Below the image, I'll have another row. In this row, also have a column spanning the full width. And here, maybe output the recipe name. So recipe name would be nice to see here. Then maybe another row with another column in there spanning the full width again. And here, what I want to add is I want to have buttons which allow me to manage this recipe. So a button which allows us to add it to the shopping list, and then one which allows us to edit it or to delete it. And actually, we could use a drop-down here. Such a drop-down may be added here by adding a div with the Bootstrap class button group. And again, this is just how to create a nice looking drop-down using the Bootstrap CSS framework, which is the framework we use in this project. Here, we need a button which will open the drop-down. This will be of type button, and it will receive a class of button. Then I'll use the button primary look, which is this bluish button. And very important, it will also receive the class drop-down toggle because it will act as such. On this button, I want to say manage recipe maybe, because we want to allow the user to manage this single recipe. And I want to add this span with the class Caray to have this arrow pointing to the bottom again. And I will distribute this over multiple lines so that it's really easy to see what's going on here. That's the button opening the dropdown. Below it, I'll have an unordered list with the class dropdown menu, and that is exactly the same setup as we chose in the header here, where we also had this drop-down menu unordered list, because that's the nice thing about Bootstrap. Drop-downs work the same no matter if you place them here in the header or use a separate button for them. And then here, the list items, the separate actions I want to have. The first one, pointing to just hash for now, should actually allow us to add ingredients to shopping list maybe. Let's see if that is too long of a string. Then I want to have a button which allows us to edit recipe and one which allows us to delete the recipe. Maybe let's rename the first one to shopping list so that it's not that much longer than the other ones. With that should be a working dropdown, but we're not going to find out before we implement it. Something we'll do after the directives section. Now below this dropdown here though, I want to add another row. And in this row here, with another column spanning the full width, I want to output the description of this recipe. Well, and then at the very bottom, I'll add the last row for now, also with a full width column. Here, we'll output the ingredients. We're not storing any ingredients on our recipe now, but we'll do so soon, and this is a nice place to output it. So that is the recipe detail component, having all the logic inside of it, which we need to display the details, and then having some options to go somewhere else in our app or to trigger something else in our app, like editing the recipe. We'll of course add all those features throughout the course. And now with that added and set up here, let's see how that looks like. Looks pretty good. We got the name, the description, ingredients, a button which doesn't work, of course. We're going to fix this later in the course. And we don't see an image at the top because right now, image, well, doesn't have a source or anything like that. Now, of course, it would be nice if we could select a recipe here in the list and display it in this recipe detail component. But one issue we have with this is we can't get our selected recipe into the detail component because the detail component is added here in our recipes component, where we also have the list, and communicating between the two components, list and detail, is something we don't know how to do right now. We have the same issue in the list component where we had to put in the code for a single item temporarily, because if we would outsource it to the recipe item component, we couldn't pass our recipe in this loop of recipes to that component. So that cross-component communication is a huge issue right now, but no worries, that is something we're going to dive deeper into in the next course section, and thereafter we'll come back to this and enable all that communication, which allows us to outsource this code into its own component and make these links clickable so that we actually load the right recipe on the right. Before doing this, let's wrap up this section here, this first part of our project, by working on the shopping list feature. We finished, for now, all our recipes components. Let's work on the shopping list now. Now, the shopping list component, if we have a look at it here in our files, here in the HTML file, we already added some content to its template here, but instead of saying the list, I want to output an unordered list of type list group, or with the class list group I should say, so using this Bootstrap class. And in there I want to have clickable list items, so I'll add an anchor tag pointing to just hash for now again to make sure it doesn't reload the page accidentally. And then add some Bootstrap classes, or one class to be precise, the list group item class, to make this look like an item in this unordered list. And I'll even get rid of the anchor tag here, of the ref I should say, and therefore set an inline style to enforce a cursor which looks like the pointer. The reason why I'm removing this is I will later use this like a button, and therefore I don't need this ref element there. It would simply lead to unwanted behaviors. So that will be a single element, a single item on our shopping list. Now, to display something here, we need an array of ingredients though. So what I'll do for now is I'll add my ingredients property here to the shopping list, and this will be an empty array. But now, just like with the recipe, we're going to use ingredients a lot throughout our app, also in the recipes section, so we probably should also create a model for this. Let's do this in the next lecture. We're going to use ingredients a lot in our application, so having a model for it makes sense. Now, where do we store this ingredient model? We stored the recipe model in the recipes folder because it belongs there feature-wise, but where does the ingredient model belong to? Well, I believe it belongs in a new folder, the shared folder, which I'm going to create in the app folder. Shared is a fitting name for this folder because it will contain features or elements of our app which are shared across different features, like the ingredient, which we're going to use both in the shopping list and the recipes section. So here I'll create a new file, and this file will be named ingredient.model.ts. In there I will export a class named ingredient, and here we will basically define how an ingredient should look like. Now, how should it look like? It should have a name, so publicly available, which is a string, and an amount, so how many items of that type should we have. So maybe amount here, which would be of type number. Now, in the constructor, we of course want to be able to receive that as arguments, name and amount, and then assign it here as before. So this name equals name, and this amount equals amount. Now, that is such a typical setup that we receive the arguments we want to assign in the constructor and then instantly assign them, that TypeScript offers a shortcut. We can get rid of the declaration of our properties up here and get rid of the content in the body of this constructor and simply add an accessor in front of the property name here, so public in front of both arguments. What that will do is, behind the scenes, it will create the same effect we had before, so it will automatically give us properties with the names we specify here as argument names, so name and amount in this case. and it will automatically assign the values we receive in this constructor to these newly created properties. So a nice and convenient shortcut. With that, we defined how an ingredient should look like. Now we can use it in the shopping list component. Let's do this in the next lecture. Let's use our newly created ingredient model. So just like with recipe, we can now define the type for our ingredients array, and this will be of type, well, ingredient array. And of course, for this, we have to import ingredients. So let's quickly do this from, and now we have to move up one folder so that we are in the app folder. And then we have to go into the shared folder, and there it's in the ingredient.model file without the file extension. With that, we can now create one first ingredient. So let's use our ingredient constructor. And we have to pass name and amount here. So the name could be apples, and we want 5, let's say. And then let's also say we want to have some tomatoes, maybe 10. That is our shopping list for now. Now we want to output it here in the component. So we got an anchor tag here, which represents a single item. And now you could put this into its own component too, but since this is going to be such a straightforward, easy item, I don't see much sense outsourcing it into its own component, though it wouldn't necessarily be bad to do so, but I also don't see a great advantage. There also isn't a lot of business logic attached to this. So I will place ng4 on this anchor tag to loop through all the ingredients, so ingredient of ingredients, and now we can output the ingredient data here inside our anchor tag. So it makes sense to output the ingredient name, I believe, and then maybe in parentheses thereafter, and these parentheses here are no Angular syntax, that is normal text here I'm outputting. Inside the parentheses, I'm going to use string interpolation to also output ingredient amount. With that, if we now save this, we already see our shopping list here at the bottom. The last missing piece I want to add is this shopping list edit section here, which should display as an input field, which then allows us to actually edit our items or add new ones. At least later in the course, it will add this functionality.